that, I want to take a few steps backwards and kind of lay out the process and the conversations that we've had between the county and the towns over the last 18 months, 24 months.
Elise, I would suggest, could you talk about the mask?
That better?
Oh, yes, very much good.
All right, happy to.
Mary, can she use that mic as well?
Do what?
Or, yeah, can she use the microphone?
Oh, yeah. Oh, if it'll work over there, it may not work over there.
That better? You gotta push it.
But it's not, the thing is, it's not close to the little pickups, so it may not work at all.
That's all. It may go too
Oh,
far.
it's too
Too
far.
far away.
Yeah.
I move it up a little bit.
Yep.
You want me to pull it stable?
Oh, I guess it's there. Yeah. Right here, good? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. I'm gonna grab a chair then and do this.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, is that better? Everyone hear me a little bit better now?
Oh, you know, I can hear you talking.
I can talk loud. I'm good at being loud. So.
Okay, great.
All right. So we started this process 2 full years ago. And when we started this process, we had a conversation with each of the municipalities at the quarterly municipality meeting about the fact that the county starting the process of looking at creating a zoning code for Delta County would probably change what we have in our IG, or need to change what we have in our IGAs, and would put us in a position of needing to take a look at those to figure out if we needed to make any adjustments. At that time, all of the municipalities said, we want to know what this looks like before we start. We want to know what your zoning code looks like before we start updating IGAs, which is fair. So we've used those quarterly municipal meetings to keep you informed of what we've been doing. I think the last time we met was last fall, because our spring one got canceled because of COVID. So we didn't have a spring update. We, with the county being where they are, the need to start those conversations about updating IGAs, the time is now. We're here. If the county's, a month or 2, maybe 3 months, depending on how this final phase of public input and commissioner hearings goes, from having this done. We're still taking input. We're still modifying this document, but we're at the end. We're definitely at the final phases here. I think the important thing, I got a copy of the IGA is to just have a quick refresher on what the IGA that we have says. I think there's a lot of, just when we talk about the IGAs out in the community at large, most people have no idea what it is and what it means. So what the IGAs say is that, well, actually let me back up first. The IGAs are based off of your long-range plans. They're based off of your master planning that you have. State statutes require a municipality to identify a 3-mile planning area, and then within that, an urban growth area, the areas where you expect to be annexing in the near future and providing services to, where you can annex is really what those are about. This map that's up right now, that you see everything in purple, that is under, I don't know if you've changed that as you're modifying your master or your comprehensive plan, but that is the old urban growth area. And I don't know if you've had conversations to change that or not. It's huge. So, were any of you around when that was created and remember why it's so big? I have an assumption, and I don't know if my assumption is right. My assumption is that that's where all the water companies are that you provide but I don't know if that's right. Is that
Is
right?
correct?
Okay.
Okay.
And it happens to mostly align with the 3-mile boundary as well, in terms of that planning area. So I suspect, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, total assumption, that at the time that that urban growth area was identified, it was really just drawn because of the water companies and not necessarily about whether or not the municipality intended to annex in that area. Okay. So I think that's a really key point to keep in mind for this rest of this conversation. So let me talk about what the IGAs say. And I'm not going to go into it in great detail. I think I came to one of your meetings last fall, and we talked about it a little bit at that point in time. What the IGAs basically say is that, well, in Peonia we have an extra layer because we also have the Highway 133 corridor plan. So that corridor plan and the IGA are connected at the hip together. So what the IGA says is that within the highway corridor planning area, if somebody comes to the county with an application, we're basically going to kick it to you, and you're going to determine whether or not you're going to process it or whether we're going to process it, and you're the ones that make that decision. So if the applicant comes to us and says, I want to do this development, whatever it is, we automatically say you got to go talk to the town. And then there's a time frame for you then to determine whether or not you're going to process it and be the reviewer, and we become the review agency. Or if you decide that you don't want to process it, then we move forward with processing it and you become the review agency. And I think up until this last 18 months, we haven't ever really had a project come up since the IGA was adopted. Maybe back in 2011 and 12, but I'm not aware of much that has happened. But last year, we actually had it come up. We had it come up on 2 projects. So we've got some recent experience to look at it, how that IGA has worked. From our perspective, it worked great because you guys did all the processing. We didn't have to, so I like that because it wasn't work I had to do. But that's what the IGA says about the highway corridor area. What it says about the rest of this purple area is that we will send you a referral for any projects that are happening, which we're statutorily obligated to do anyways, and that's something we're required to do with or without the IGA. But it has some specific language that says that if the development is within 400 feet of your sewer, they have to connect. So they have to connect to your services if the development's within 400 feet. And then it also says that all development needs to be served by water, by domestic water, which you control in this whole area through being the water provider for this whole area. So you really, as a municipality, have a pretty strong level of control over what happens in this area, not just because of the IGA, but because of the fact that you're the water provider in this area for the most part. What the IGA does not do is take away the county's land use authority or take away the municipality's land use authority. We all exercise our own authority. What we have stated in this IGA is that we're going to work together and have better collaboration in these areas than what is required. The minimum requirement is we send you a notice and a referral saying, hey, we're doing this, and give us your comments. This says we're going to do our best to work with you on implementing your comments as well. So I think another important key about the IGAs, and I've heard some chatter about this over the last several weeks as this has come to the forefront of the public's awareness through our process, is that the IGAs are not binding. You guys can end it at any time, and we can end it at any time. So that really forces us to make sure we're working well together, and that we're working to make this work. And so I think that's an important note for this as well, that we do this because we think it's the right thing to do. And that's why we have these agreements, because it results in better outcomes for everybody involved, for the property owners, and for the municipality and for the county. So with that background, this map you're looking at right now is the first draft of our zoning map that we put together. When we started this process, we really started the creation of the zoning document and the creation of the zoning maps about a year ago. Actually, the zoning maps we really didn't start until about January. The document itself was started about a year ago, and we came up with potential zone districts, and one of those was an urban growth area zone district. The idea that we had at the time was that we have IGA with each municipality, we have an identified urban growth area. These are the areas that we all collectively believe that over time could become urban. And so we created an urban zone district for the county that says within this urban growth area, the county will do urban zoning or urban development if there's water and sewer. But our IGAs also say if there's water and sewer and a project can annex, it should. Okay? But if it can't, the county can do it. That's what our IGAs say. So we enabled ourselves to do that through the zoning document by creating a zone district that allows for urban development. And then we assumed we would just apply that to urban growth areas because that is really easy. Those are already pre-drawn boundaries, and so when we did the first mapping, that's what we did. We colored those urban growth areas in the IGAs purple. Paonias is huge, so is Deltas. Cedar Edges and Hotchkiss and Crawford, or not Crawford, Orchard City are much smaller. Crawford doesn't have any. They don't have a growth area identified at all. And then we put the document out for its first review, and property owners in these purple areas did not like it. We heard that's probably, other than concentrated animal feeding operations, we heard as much about the urban growth areas and people that are located in that purple not wanting to be purple. And for the simple reason that they are existing agricultural operations and they have no intention at this point in time in their planning horizon of doing anything but being agriculture. And contemplating of urban development is not in their planning horizon. So we took a step back and said, all right, let's apply the same logic that we applied to the rest of the mapping and apply that in these urban growth areas and really think hard about what properties are most likely to annex in the near future. And we took another crack at that mapping. And we did that with all the municipalities, and so with Paonia, if you want to pull that up, what we did, second map, what we did was we took the highway corridor plan. So there's the planning area A and planning area B. We have a very specific agreement as to what happens in those areas, so we colored those urban growth areas. And remember, our agreement there says if somebody wants to do something, they have to come to you first. And we would only do it if you basically say to us, we're not going to do it, you do it. So those are the areas in the second map that we colored purple. And then everything else, we applied the same logic as that we used to come up with the rest of the county. And that basically is a combination of looking at existing subdivision patterns, of existing lot sizes, and road access. I know that was a little more challenging around Paonia. We've got all these scattered little subdivisions out on the outskirts of Paonia. What we did in other parts of the county was when we started having lots of 5-acre subdivisions and there was big acreage in between them, we would connect them and create more like a corridor. This is a A5 subdivision driven corridor. A20 is the next category. So A5 is for properties that are 5 acres and larger, and it's really more of a residential category, but agriculture is allowed. But I would say residential is the first driver and ag is second. A20 is an agricultural zone district, but also residential, and those are for properties that are 20 acres and larger. And then A35 is an agricultural zone district, also residential, but ag is definitely the leading use there, and that's for properties 35 and larger. So, in playing around with the mapping, this is what we came up with in terms of how to redraw that urban growth area. So everything you see in purple again is planning area A and B out of the highway corridor plan as currently mapped. I think another really key point is, this doesn't change our IGA, and it doesn't change your urban growth area, and it doesn't change anything that we've agreed to with those IGAs. What it does change is what the county would consider approving in these areas. So in an area that's zoned A5, we would consider subdivisions up to 5 acres per lot. We do have provisions in there for lot sizes that can be smaller than 5 acres, and, you know, we've got the ability to say, you know, maybe you have 8 acres, but you want to do a family split, you can still do a family split. In that E5, we gave ourselves a little flexibility for that. But you're not going to see urban development, urban subdivision of that land by the county. So, and in any of those areas. There are definitely some distinctions in what can happen in purple versus orange, yellow, and green. There's not a huge amount of difference in what you can do versus what you can't do. The big difference is process. What's the process you have to go through? So what we've tried to do with this document is the more impact that you might have on adjacent property, you're going to go through a greater review process. The less impact, you're going to go through a simpler process to get approval. So we tried to create that spectrum. So in the urban growth area, some of the more commercial type uses, more traditional urban type uses have a very easy approval process because that's where they belong, is, you know, close to urban services. And they have a harder approval process when you get out into the rural areas because they really don't belong there. So incentivize people to take those kinds of uses where they best belong. There's not a whole lot of things you can't do in the urban growth area that you can do in A35, A20, and A5, and vice versa, but there are a few key exceptions, and one of those, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, is CAFOs. So any size of CAFO is not allowed in the urban growth areas at all. In the A5 zone district, only the smallest of facilities are allowed.
It contains animal feeding operation. Thank you.
What was that?
Oh, what it came over.
Oh, concentrated animal feeding operations, so chicken houses and feedlots and things. So we've got 2 categories, small, medium, large. Can't do any of them in urban growth area. You can do the very smallest of them in A5. You can do all of them in A20, but you have to have at least 35 acres if you're going to be a medium or large facility. And you can do all of them in A35, but again, you have to have a minimum of 35 acres if you're doing a medium or large facility. There's a couple other, I pull up the chart, you can study it really quick. But that's probably and that's what we heard the most about in terms of concern. So that's one of those key differences I want to make sure everybody is aware of. Part of my conversation with the other municipalities has been, when I really step back and think about that purple, and I go back to that previous map that has so much purple on it, I don't think you want the county approving urban development on your boundary. I think you want to be doing that, no matter what. And so keeping us from doing that, to me, is better planning. The entity that is accustomed to doing urban development should be the entity doing urban development. The county really shouldn't be doing that. And by keeping us from doing that, preventing smaller lot subdivision up against the municipal boundary really protects your ability to annex in the future. If you get a bunch of 2.5 acre or 1 acre subdivision all around your boundary, that makes future expansion of the municipality more challenging. And I don't know that that will happen much moving forward in the future, but you certainly would prevent it from happening or make it much more difficult if you get ringed in by larger lot subdivision happening in that area. So I think that's one of the pros of the change. I think that's a good rundown. It'd be really helpful, I think, just to get your initial reactions to that. I do want to emphasize that what this changes is not our agreements, it changes what the county would be willing to consider. So as you continue to study this document, you really want to look at that table 2D in the second draft and look at that list of uses and those differences, and you'll notice that there's not a whole lot of difference in what you can and can't do. There is a lot of difference in the process. And the Cabos is probably the biggest example of where there's a real distinction there. I'll pull it up in front of you and see if I can visually grab another one where there might be some real distinction, but not much. Outdoor shooting ranges, racetracks, paintball courses. Those are allowed in the larger lot and not allowed in the urban growth area. That's about it. Everything else is very similar. It's the process that's different. So, give you a sense of the differences in those. There's not a huge degree of difference. And a lot of that is just based on the fact that because the county had no zoning ever, we have a total hodgepodge of activity going on out there. If we had done zoning back in the 70s and 80s when everybody else did, we probably would have distinct commercial areas and distinct industrial areas, but we don't. We've got it all everywhere, all over. So, oh, shush now.
I guess my concern is, so we have a lot of areas south of town, which is A5 and A20, and then northeast of town as well, which makes me concerned about, what about operations that the town isn't really thrilled with that can't get approved in those areas?
Yeah. When I talked with Cedar Edge, my conversation with Greg, and Hotchkiss as well, I think everyone's got similar concerns there. So, number one, all of these things are allowed to stay. Just as a reminder that with specific development, you can ask for anything anywhere. And there are no minimums, there are no setbacks, there are no, it's a case-by-case negotiation. So I think part of looking at this, I encourage everybody to look at this with all right, do these standards start to address the concerns that we would maybe have if something like this, whatever it is, were to come in next door or adjacent to the municipality. So look at it with that set of eyes on. And then second of all, we need to update the IGAs. I can foresee in those IGAs some conversation. I don't know if the commissioners will agree to this or not. I don't know if you will all agree to this or not, but I think a reasonable conversation is to say, within a reasonable boundary around the municipality, can some uses be a no? Because we are concerned about the impact it might have because of odor or dust or whatever that concern might be. And I think that through those IGAs, we could possibly address some of those specific concerns. I think if you also look at lot sizes around Paonia and around each of the municipalities, you really start to get constricted what could happen when you start to apply the standards. So for example, even though something is zoned A20, if you look at that stuff that's south of town, that's all mostly like right at 20 to 23 acres in size. There's not much 35-acre stuff right there. There is on the up around Blackbridge. When you head up there, you get a few larger parcels. So there might need to be some refinement. Maybe there should be more A5. I received some comments from one of the property owners that's in the green as you head up north that they think they should be A5 or A20. So we're going to look at that. They're probably right. We just look at what's happening there. So I'm not sure if we got the A5 and A20 exactly right. We just sort of tried to connect those existing subdivisions by connecting lots in between them. And you can almost cut and dice that anyway. So I'm not sure we got that right, but I do think through the IGAs we could potentially address some of those more specific things that each of the municipalities have expressed concern about. And I can list those. It's going to be heavy industry, CAFOs, and landfills. There's a few of those that, and all rural heavy industry, which are things like, rock crushing, not mining of rock, but like, crushing it into smaller pieces, explosives. And it's basically anything that has heavy truck traffic, heavy dust, heavy odor potential. It's a pretty high bar. Those are permitted in the rural industrial zone, conditional in the A5 zone, and limited use review in the A35 and A20 zones. I should probably explain those too. Let me see if we've got other questions. And not allowed in urban growth areas.
So are there any other questions or comments? Yeah, Dave.
I just wondered about, you were explaining the pre and the post maps. A lot of our boundary is now not in that UGA.
Right.
And, to me, that's a little more concerning because we don't have as much flexibility as the town there, if I'm understanding this right.
So, this doesn't change your flexibility. And it doesn't change our agreement that anything within 400 feet of the town connects to sewer. And it doesn't change our agreement that if it can annex, it should annex. So that all remains the same. What it does change is the types of uses the county would even consider. And it changes the process that we would use to review those applications. Your flexibility remains there. If you can want to annex it and the property owner wants to annex, that's what should be happening in all of this area. Obviously, the things further south as you head towards Stewart Mesa, they don't have ability to annex. So it'll be decades before those areas are ever annexing. And that's one of the concerns of the commissioners is that with these urban growth areas that are in the IGA is so big, it impacts property owners that will probably never annex. And so one of the things you'll probably hear back from the commissioners when we start having these IGA conversations is, what is your reasonable urban growth area? What really does make the most amount of sense and where should that really be located? And is it really this? And I think this is, to me this doesn't make sense, but something where there's still purple all the way around might in the long term. So I think there's some room for sorting that out together.
I wasn't after flexibility as much as the concern about not having the ability to make a decision about where an applicant goes.
Yeah,
That's where the problem might have. If we don't have a ribbon around the town of purple, then we cannot ask that they first come to us.
You
Is that
can.
correct?
This doesn't change that. The IGA is separate from this map right here. So the IGA boundary, which is that bigger boundary, right? Our agreement says that if they're in planning area A or B, or can annex, so they have to have adjacency, that they should annex. And that you have the decision of whether they come to you or come to us in the A and B area. And that's where the purple is. We put that as purple because that is, in our agreement, that is your decision. So that's why we call it that urban growth area, because those are clearly areas that you are targeting for future growth and future annexation, and that we've agreed that we'll basically stay hands off unless you tell us you want us to do it, in which case we'll do it. We'll process it. I shouldn't say we'll approve it, we'll process it to see if it gets approval. The rest of the areas around there say that we will give you a referral, and if it can annex, it should annex. And if they are within 400 feet, we'll make them hook up to sewer. You would provide them with sewer access. So if you're providing sewer access, you're probably going to want to annex it. Like there's a correlation there, right? So this document doesn't change that one bit. The IGA continues to govern as well.
Thomas?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. So if you could, I have two aspects of this plan that I'd like to speak about. And first we can just address this, the general zoning issues that I think overall seem pretty benign, let's say, hypothetically, with the map as it's currently drawn, we have a little corner of Paonia that is like a condominium building, I guess of the county. They're on like Oak and Thirst. They call it it's that little pad, on the corner by Colorado. The Pavlish Sherman edition, I guess, or exclusions. Anyway, so that's part of county, and it's in your 20-acre A20 there. So you're saying that town would have the right to annex that under, like if somebody wants to change the use of the property, or if it's already used currently for agriculture, would there be any change at all?
Yeah, so the way annexation works is the county has no say over annexation. That's entirely a municipal authority. But the property owner has to agree with it. The property owner has to be willing to annex for you to annex them. So that if that property owner and the municipality want to annex, then you have to control that. The county has no say in whether you annex or not. That's your statutory authority. The only time a municipality can annex without the property owner's permission is if they're the donut. They're 100% surrounded by the municipality. So this document doesn't change that. So if somebody is immediately adjacent to town, let's say that they're ag today, but they want to do 20 residential units. In the A20, they wouldn't be able to. We would say, sorry, you can't. Let's say you've got 20 acres and they want to do 21-acre lots. It's technically feasible, but by zoning, with the A20, the answer would be you can get maybe one more lot, and that's it.
Right.
You have to go talk to the town, so they can come and talk to you, and they can annex, and they can do an urban development where they get their 20 units, right?
Sure.
So, yeah, so this would prevent us from doing that kind of thing. Now, if it was more of a business commercial type use, if they need water and sewer, we're going to send them to you if they're in that immediate adjacent. Really, the county should not be processing this. You should really go talk to the town. You know, are you providing sewer and water service extraterritorially right now to somebody who's not part of a water company? I don't think you are. Or it's limited. I can't remember exactly what you're doing there, but you guys are in a fair amount of control because of water and sewer for everything immediately adjacent to you.
Of sorts. Okay, so, see, hypothetical situation with that same lot, as it's currently, like say the owner is there now, and with the plan as it is currently, if they want to put a gazebo in, they could, without any comment from town.
No, you get comment. We have to send it to you to look at. And
It's outside of the IGA?
Yeah, if anybody is within that bigger purple area, we send it to you, no matter what. We're required to do that because it's within your 3-mile area. So even if somebody was down on that very southern tip of the purple, we would send it to you for comment.
So then your designation is only to be used if town says we don't care and kicks it back to the county.
Only in the highway corridor plan. That's the highway corridor. Yeah,
only
and the
in
rest of it is just that we will send you the referral. And if they are within 400 feet, that we will ensure that they hook up to sewer.
But the use is still determined by the county.
Yes, use is still determined by the county.
Okay.
Now, to
Okay.
that issue of CAFO, the other thing you have to do is put a pinpoint on the schools and draw a half-mile around them for the smaller facilities
Yeah.
and a 1 mile around them for the large facilities.
Yeah, thanks.
And there's nothing allowed, even if the zoning allows it, the
Yeah.
standard would.
I understand the setbacks, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so specifically regarding like what you have here, first of all, I think that the urban growth area in Paonia should be tied essentially to the water service. I know that a lot of people who are on the periphery and use water companies have strong feelings about their independence from town, and I think that that's totally respectable. But realistically, if town is providing services, essential services to them, they're a nominal part of town. And I think urban growth has probably turned off a lot of people, because it's really like rural residential, is what it amounts to, it's not perfect. So, anyway, that's what we need. But it seems like the utilities should designate the EDA, basically, in my opinion.
That would be the bigger.
Well, it would be kind of spider, really. It wouldn't be like a chunk. It would be wherever the lines are. I know that Cindy's not here. The people that are over in Hidden Valley is designated as a 5 right now, you know. And if you've been back there, it's a neighborhood. Like it's like a planned little suburban kind of street. So, you know, how does that fall? It seems like the designation of EDA versus agricultural, like it's kind of a dichotomy that a lot of places are not going to fall into.
Yeah, we don't really have anything in between that A5 and urban growth area. We don't have any category in between those two. We talked about it, but we didn't create that, so.
Clark?
My question is, we have 133, and then we have 92, and then we have 65, which are all scenic byways. What changes along the highway on what you would zone in on? Because scenic byways have very specific requests when people build and whatnot.
So, just like we do today, we have, you know, if somebody's in that scenic byway, they have to demonstrate that they are minimizing their impact to the scenic byway, so that can be through landscaping, you know, lower profile buildings, being further set off of the highway. We have that in our current subdivision regulations and in our current specific development regulations, and we have that in here too. So the scenic byway remains, we will treat it the way we've always treated it. That doesn't change. So, in terms of uses, you know, this document still allows a pretty broad range of potential uses in all of the zone districts. And the commissioners felt pretty strongly that we needed to stick true to who we are, which is that there's a broad range of uses across the whole county. What's different is that not every single use has to go through a complicated process. Some of them can go through a simple process. Some of them still go through a complicated process. And there are a few places, and there are a few where they said, in this area, no to this specific kind of use. But there's not very many of those.
How about with conservation easement areas? Because we have lots of them.
So this was probably the most difficult set of data I've ever tried to hunt down in my life. But we finally got it. We had to pay to get it. And it's probably, I know it's not accurate because it's only as good as the efforts to collect it out there. But all that light green hatching are the conservation easements that we know about. There's certainly more of them, but those are the ones that we know about. And so this document also says that if you are in a conservation easement, you're going to have to provide us with all of the conservation easement documents, and it's not our job to enforce them, but we're not going to approve something that's contrary to the conservation easement.
Next door to it, or?
So if you're looking at what's next door to it, I think it would be what was it about that property that made that conservation easement valuable? Was it wildlife habitat? Was it, you know, historic orchards, whatever it might have been? And there is a lot of language in this document about protecting and preserving those areas. So, and Allison is sitting over here, we had lots of conversations about wildlife, and so if you've got one property trying to subdivide and it's right adjacent to another area
purpose of this is for the IGA, not just general comments about the plan?
It's both, but.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, actually both, but I want to make sure you guys know that this change doesn't change the IGA.
Gotcha, okay. A couple things, I noticed you did do some stuff on lighting, but there's no mention of dark sky kind of stuff, and we're starting to march down that road, and I don't know if there's been consideration or comment about that. I wonder about junk ordinances and how Peach Valley is going to be handled, and some of these other places on the way to the landfill transfer station. I mean, it's just incredible. Who's going to really enforce this stuff?
Thank you, those are good questions. So, hooded lighting is required on new development. We have that today. We did get some comments about setting lumen standards. I think the commissioners are gonna go that far, but we do have hooded lighting. I think the issue there is enforcement on it, which to the enforcement question then. So, in the 2020 budget, the commissioners budgeted for an enforcement position, full-time enforcement position. That is something we've never had. It's not just enforcement of land use, but we've got a lot of, so the junk ordinance is actually through our health department. And then there's health codes as well. And, enforcement is kind of scattered between every department. So there will be an enforcement person. That was put into the 2020 budget. Commissioners wanted to get this adopted first, and then that's one of those job descriptions you should hopefully see being advertised here in the next few months to try to hire. As it relates to junk, we had a lot of conversation about pulling junk 100% into this document, and in the end decided not to for two reasons. Number one, the statutory authority for the county to enforce junk ordinances is different than the statutory authority for land use, and this document would have been much bigger to accommodate the enforcement penalties and all of that, because it's not the same set of statutory authorities. So instead, we just pulled it in by reference. The junk ordinance is its own ordinance, it stands on its own 2 feet. That being said, it is lousy, and it needs serious work, and the county attorney's office has been working on getting that prepared to get updated. So I think that's one of the next conversations you'll see rolling out is updates to the junk ordinance to make it more effective. Because pretty much today, the way it's written, you can justify just about anything as long as you're not actually dumping rubbish on your property. Like you can, the junk side of that is very, very weak. This document does say that junk is not allowed, and it defines it. And so it will tie to that updated junk ordinance, that ordinance needs to be updated for true enforcement of it to happen. So that is underway, and it will be one of the next conversations.
And a couple of other short things. I noticed on the public notification that internet was optional. And I noticed a lot of people that are citizens, it's like really, that's how they find out about stuff. So I wonder if that could be more teeth in that, because I think the way everything's going, this paper notification of what's going on is kind of old school stuff. And so having that optional, I think is a good idea as far as public awareness. The other thing, I wondered if there's ways, like I noticed on the trucking thing, that there has to be this trucking plan. I wondered if that covers oil and gas operations. And then the second thing about oil and gas operations, is there anything in this that allows us to do local ordinances or local restrictions on oil and gas outside of our boundaries?
That was a lot. I'm going to try to hit it all. All right, on the notices. We post everything on our website. And once it's going to commissioner meetings, statutorily, counties are not allowed to use the internet as their primary. We are required to keep doing paper, publishing in the newspaper and mailing published notices. I think municipalities can opt now to have the internet be their primary. Counties have not gotten that change through statutes. There's been efforts at it, but it hasn't happened. So for us, internet is the add-on, not the primary.
Right, but you've allowed yourself to be optional rather than requiring yourself to.
Right, so we add that on. That's a add-on. One of the things that the county's gonna have to figure out is, every because we simplified a lot of things, not everything will. So there's going to have to be a system by which the public knows what's going on. We've been talking about what that looks like. So I don't know what the solution to that will be in the long run. On the issue of trucking, the trucking language in there, that applies to all land uses that are going through this document. They've got to, communicate what their trucking is. And the number of trucks could kick something into that heavy industry. It's 30 trucks, more than 30 trucks per day, whatever that is, it's now a heavy industry, heavy industry review. As it relates to oil and gas, this document does not talk about oil and gas at this point in time. So it's a reserved section for the future. The county has been participating in the Senate Bill 181 process and monitoring it. And as the state finishes their rulemaking process, which will tell us what they're going to regulate and what they're not going to regulate, so that we can determine if we want to go further or do something in addition to what the state's doing. So that will also be another next conversation. I think that's an important key here, is that this document is not the end, it is the beginning. There'll be, this just starts a snowball effect of other things that are going to need to be done next. And oil and gas regulations are one of them, IGA updates are one of them, junk ordinance updates is one of it. We've talked road impact fees as well as a potential next step. And we're working on fire impact fees right now, so that we've got referenced in here that they are still, the work is still to be done to get them completely underway. So.
The last thing is kind of obtuse, but I have friends down in Hastings Mesa where rich people have moved in and they put helicopter pads on their land. And it's a huge nuisance. And I didn't know, I saw a helicopter pad reference in there, but nothing that restricted the noise or timing or those kind of things. And it was a huge problem for
Yeah, that is one I hope to get in there before the final draft. We've done a couple helicopter pads, and you've got helicopter pads happening out there right now. They should have come through specific development. They're required to come through specific development. So we approved one over near Delta a few years ago, and that's one of them. We need to go in and dig into that file and look at it and see what we did there. We'll look at a couple others so that we can write some regulations in there. It is one that keeps getting bumped to the list. So, but yeah, and my hope is by the time it's all done, we'll have some stuff in there. If not, it's something that'll need to be added. It's in there as a placeholder so we don't forget it. Yeah.
Michelle?
Yeah, a couple things. So first I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly on the referral process. Can you hear me over the phone? Is that?
Say
No?
that.
Okay, you can't hear me at that one. Okay, so the referral process from the county to the town. Am I understanding correctly that the way that works within our 3-mile boundary is that if, let's say, someone wants to do something on an A20 lot, it's already an agricultural lot, they want to put a small animal feeding operation there, the county is required to notify the town and take our comments, but our comments are in no way binding to the process, and the county still has freedom to make the final decision on that. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So my concern related to that is there's an incredible amount of leeway in here for things that are allowed without any public review. So we've got the categories where things are allowed, they're permitted, they're limited, or they're limited plus, and all of those are strictly administrative without public input required. Is that accurate?
No. That's partially accurate. So allowed uses, they're allowed by right. I think in your own zoning codes you've got similar things. That doesn't mean that they don't have to be in compliance with this code, so it could become an enforcement issue, but they're allowed by right. No approval required. Permitted uses require that they come in for a quick administrative check at the counter that they're meeting the minimum requirements. So water, sewer, setback, access, that they have adequate of those basic things. For the limited use reviews, the ones that have the little asterisk by it, those require adjacent property owner notification and being sent to referral agencies. So on the L's, the review agencies, which to me municipalities would be one of them, and it's within their 3-mile boundary is a review agency. It's, you know, we'll be sending it to engineering, public health, and parks and wildlife, and Army Corps of Engineer, if it's by wetlands or water, the list goes on and on. That happens on all Ls and all Cs as well. So,
Okay, so adjacent property owners have to be notified, but it's still not a public process where you're having a public meeting where the public can come in and comment, correct? Okay.
So the way that L is set up, again, I think the commissioners thought process that within each of those categories that are labeled as an L, there's a range of scope and scale that might be presented. So within that L, if somebody comes in and it seems maybe it's very small scale, very low impact, set up very well, limited controversy, planning director can approve it. It's the planning director's discretion if they feel like, nope, I don't want to sign my name on this, and to kick it to a conditional review. Or if the applicant can't meet the criteria, it automatically gets kicked into a conditional review. So there's some discretion there that would be dependent on the planning director's review of that. So I'm not going to be the planning director anymore, so that won't be me. But if it was me, when I send it to those adjacent property owners, if I'm hearing back and hearing a bunch of about it, I wouldn't want to put my professional stamp on that. I would want to kick that to the planning commission and the county commissioners. And the commissioners in conversations, we had a joint meeting with the planning commission last night. That's something that will be important to them too. So they will also be watching how that goes. That's why there's that discretion in there, so that when it's a simple thing, you can keep the red tape out of the way and let that person move forward with their enterprise and what they want to do, and gives that call-up process in the event that a limited review really isn't appropriate.
Okay, so just to summarize my concerns on this. The referral process to the town is not in any way binding, so if the town doesn't want a certain use within the 3-mile radius, we can provide as many comments as we want to the county, but the county is under no obligation to move forward based on those comments. Things that are allowed within that 3-mile radius without any public hearing include oil and gas support services, medium industry, heavy industry, capos of all sizes, including up to 49,000 chickens, I believe, on an A5 size lot.
No, you'd have a 35-acre lot with that many chickens.
35 acres, but within the A5 area.
No, A5, 35, those aren't allowed. And the medium-sized facilities are not allowed.
Wouldn't that be a small size facility with chickens at 0.02 or, okay.
So
My math may be wrong on that.
your, looking at my calculator. So your,
Actually, that'd be 900 animal units.
get my table up here.
I'm looking at the
That'd be medium.
medium, okay.
Okay. So,
So on 20 acres.
okay, yeah, great. So IACOs are allowed in A5. I was thinking the large. So that would be, calculator. So 15,000 chickens on the low end.
Mhm.
And, okay, yeah, 49. I was thinking the larger one, sorry.
Okay, so I can run through the whole list, but basically a lot of large industrial uses that are really, in my mind, incompatible with the North Fork Valley. And the way it's written now, the town has no real authority in making those decisions, even with properties that are immediately adjacent to the town boundaries. We have the opportunity to comment, but our residents don't have an opportunity to speak at a public meeting about that. So that's really concerning to me. I would personally not be comfortable moving forward without some binding language in an updated IGA.
I think an IGA is a good place to have some of those conversations with the county. I think it's important, again, that's true today. and the IGA becomes a tool for coordination. But I think the IGAs are written very carefully to not have either the town or the county abdicate their statutory authority. So the county maintains its authority, the town maintains its authority as well. And so, but I do think the IGA is a good place to have further conversation about maybe there needs to be some distinction within an area around each of the municipalities. I think that that's a great place for that conversation to happen.
Dave?
This goes back to our 1/3 hearing quarter plan. You said that the applicants in there, they go to us to get a decision whether we're covering it or not. I think that's what I'm tying into with what Michelle was saying, is that we would like to see something where we make a decision about having a public hearing on it before it goes to the county. That's the concern I was trying to raise earlier, but I didn't articulate well.
And I think that that definitely makes sense in those areas where you can annex. I think what you'll hear from the commissioners is concern about what about those areas you may never annex, and how do you treat those. And I know you'll hear from them about that.
Okay, other comments, but, yeah.
Okay, if we're gonna get into the CAPOs, we'll get to that half of my thinking. And this is gonna take a minute, so I apologize if I ramble. So, for my background, and at least you were privy to an email that I had with Robbie LaValle, I'm not sure exactly what the title is, administrative development. I have family roots in Kentucky where my mother now runs a cow-calf operation. It's very similar to kind of what you see out here in the surrounding areas right now, where there's a herd of mother cows, and every year they have calves. The cows are sold to market, and then they're rebred the next following season. So it's a very stressful and difficult job, and I've done it. My mom's 70 years old, and she has 190 head right now. She's doing it alone. So all that to say, I understand some parts of agriculture, and that background is part of the reason why I like to live here. Right? I think that in our town, the Pam's doing their master plan revision right now, and in those meetings, every single attendee listed agriculture as their primary thing that they want to keep here, right?
So we were to in our
Yeah.
master plan.
Yeah. So don't take what I'm about to say as somebody who's like a vegan PETA kind of activist type thing. But CAPOs are probably one of the most destructive and harmful operations that could be brought into any area. I got to experience this again firsthand. Just this past month, I traveled back to Kentucky and came back through the Arkansas River Valley. I don't know if you've ever been there. Yeah. Then you know exactly what it's like. It is disgusting and unhealthy. It is dangerous, stricken with poverty, and just incredibly sad. I was just so sad driving through there. And I don't want to see that happen here. It seems like the phrasing of this document is meant to leave the door wide open to these enterprises to come in and be protected legally from being responsible for the danger and harm that they cause. And I cannot understand why. So if you can tell me why, I would love to know. Hypothetically, in my mind, somebody's going to make some money, right? Can you tell us who?
I'm not sure I understand that part of the question, but
Okay, no, you can just say no. You can't tell me who. That's fine.
no, I don't understand that part of the question, but I do think, that when you look around what is here in the county, Foster Farms has been, here in the county since the 80s. We've got Tom Whiting's facility. Anybody ever had a chance to go see his facility out north of Delta? He's single-handedly responsible for almost every single feather that goes into the fly tying industry right here out of Delta County. Very neat operation.
Very
beautiful
cool.
birds.
Yeah.
Stunning birds.
I have three
The
whiting
chicken
hens,
can be
yeah.
pretty, they're as pretty as you can get. We've got Foster Farms all over, and then we've got a couple of these smaller 50,000 hen houses that are part of the organic egg production. You can buy your organic or eggs at the store at City Safeway or City Market. They're part of that chain. And there's a ton of them in Montrose, a bunch of the barns in Montrose. I personally, I could be proven wrong, so I don't think these facilities are knocking our doors down trying to come here. Montrose County does not regulate them in any way, shape, or form. There is zero regulation in Montrose. The majority of them have been going there. We can talk about whether the setbacks make sense or don't make sense. The commissioners have not been willing to say no to them. So what we've tried to do is put together a set of regulations to manage the impacts from them, because they do have impacts. There's no doubt about that. And the way these are written was, those that sat on the CAFO working group, I encourage you to reach out to them, talk to Steve Harper, talk to Jacob Gray, Tom Kay, Patrick Newman isn't here anymore, but he was on there, Les Morgan. A lot of the conversations that group had that helped us come up with some of these ideas was to really try to incentivize best management practices in these so that we don't end up with some of the impacts. And so all of the setbacks, everything here is written, and there's a very, very important sentence in the standards. I put it in bold in the second draft that says additional setbacks may be required in order to implement the requirements of this subsection. So that is odor management, water quality, dust management, noise mitigation, pest management, truck routing.
Okay.
So the idea was, if these do continue to come, let's give some clear parameters of what's required, including strong management requirements. And we don't have any of that in our current standards.
Okay.
None of that
Yeah,
exists.
thank you for pointing that out. My primary objection, the setbacks are fine, like they're tiny and effective, but it doesn't really matter because what you've done in what section is it? I have it written here. Chapter 7. 7A 2B CRS 35 3.5 1.2 AI provides protection against nuisance suits for agricultural uses that are established prior to surrounding land uses. Right? Pursuant to the authority granted by state statute, the protection against nuisance suits that is created by state statute is expanded to uses in the agricultural land use category regardless of when they are established. Right? Why?
So the commissioners, in their conversations through this whole thing, going back to the master plan, our master plan process and hearing the importance of agriculture, they want to ensure that new farmers taking land and doing new things have the ability to do so without the risk of
The dust, especially this year with no rain, have gotten out of hand with some of the facilities. And it used to be arsenic was put in chicken feed, and you were getting high arsenic levels in the air. I had a call from California from UC Davis yesterday about that. I can't believe you only have 100-foot setback on a small operation. It's like, how many feet from a school where they spend 8 hours, then they can go home and be 100 feet from these fan blowing dust. They're all, I'm guessing, dry bedded manure places and piles of manure, like mini mountains of manure just shoveled into the air. And I think the first thing is, I think any type of containment animal should have its own section in the land use plans, because that might be easier to change to do that. But I feel the way you have it now, you're just putting neighbor against neighbor. And I feel quite strongly on that. My husband's a former cattleman. He also raised over 1,000 pigs from Iowa. And when you get near these confinement places, what they do in Iowa and most states east of Colorado is they bond them. Because what they found out is so many of these CAFOs, MAFOs, IFOs, whatever, they go bankrupt, and then the taxpayer has to pay to get it cleaned up. And we have one in Hotchkiss that for the past 5 years has been taking dead chickens and just burying them on the property. And can you imagine if there's a gully washer storm? That means the taxpayers have to clean that up. So I would look into bonding some of these. It's done, like I said, mainly east of Colorado. They bond them so the taxpayers don't have to clean up the mess.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So still on animal feeding operations, but also the heavy industry. I appreciate that there are mitigation plans built into every one of those. I'm a little concerned about the language though. Some of it's a little bit loose. And there are a lot of places where you see things will be mitigated to the extent practicable. It's not clear to me what practicable means in the document or who it's meant to refer to. Is it practicable for the county, for the taxpayers, for the property owner, for the neighbors, for the operators? I think a little more clarity there would be really helpful so that we can see the extent of what that mitigation plan can actually do.
And I would agree with that, especially as far as CAFOs go. It says that mitigation will be done to the greatest extent possible, and that is never defined. And so that's an argument to be made that, oh yeah, this one thing is the greatest extent possible, and so better language on that would probably be great as well. All right, other comments? Yeah.
Sorry, just one more. I would also like to see in this maybe another IGA issue, greater control allowed to the town for areas that are part of our watershed. I think we know that water, roads, infrastructure in general is already challenging, and then to add something on an industrial scale to areas where they could essentially destroy our town with one bad storm or with one accident. That's just really scary to me.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Is there anything you'd like to wrap up with, Elise?
No, I just didn't, I wanted to make sure everybody knew where we were, what was going on, and, gear up. I think the IGA conversations should be happening this fall, really. I do think for the county, just from a capacity standpoint, they're not going to be able to do all 6 at the same time, that would be overwhelming, so there's gonna have to be, where are you guys at with your comp plan update? Because I think that's an important piece of that puzzle too.
Yeah, it's kind of stalled at the moment,
Okay.
but we want to get it done in the near
Yeah, I
future
think
for
that would
sure.
be an important piece of the puzzle as well.
So if people have concerns, would it be best to go to Robert?
Yeah, I would encourage you to call Mark and talk to him. We've got, comments will be accepted on this thing until the end. I mean, that doesn't stop. I mean, we're in the iteration phase now where we're taking comments, we're making changes, we're taking comments, we're making changes, but comments will continue until it's done. I think most of you that have brought up issues, most of you have sent comments individually already, so you can keep doing that. The Planning Commission will start a more formal review of this at their next meeting, and however long that takes them, I don't know if they'll be able to do it in 1 or 2 meetings, it might take them however long it takes them to get through their formal review of it, before we ever kick off a formal public hearing process with the commissioners, which will probably be sometime in September, maybe even pushing towards the end of September, depending on how the Planning Commission conversation goes. They're a chatty group, so they like to talk, so it might take a little bit of time there. But yeah, I would reach out to Mark. I think he's a good one. I think you talked to Robbie as well.
Thank you very much, Elise, for coming and doing this for us. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Oh, I have one quick question.
Sure.
Well, two. Number one, did you use any of the Lisa program that went on? Robbie LaValle was on it. My husband, Lisa, what they did is determine agricultural land and non-ag land for the county. And did you look at soil maps for your area?
What we really relied on is a data set that shows where irrigated ag is and non-irrigated ag, and then the tax assessors assessments as well. So we kind of layered that all together. That's mostly what we've used for. And
You didn't go to farm services?
for the data,
Yeah, they have.
we do on subdivisions. As subdivisions come in, we can get those soils reports and we'll get them.
Because there's a beautiful package of a soil map that
It was really hard to look at that at a
Explains everything.
county-wide level.
you can do it
It-
sections.
So,
Thank you.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions or comments, I move that we adjourn this meeting. Thank you so much. 1987.